This is to support dialogue and problem solving for adaptation to climate change for local stakeholders. And one of the things that we did this morning is also part of the discussion that can come in during our community work. The purpose of this toolkit is to provide tools that enable stakeholders to understand climate change adaptation, and the importance of ecosystems and the services they provide in helping humans deal with and avoid impacts from climate change. It will also provide some initial support for adaptation planning. So once the community is more aware and understands the basic concept of climate change and the ecosystem services, a better understanding of the ecosystem services, then it will help support adaptation planning and implementation and bring greater access to climate information and funding resources to local stakeholders. Normally, the training of trainers as designed will take about 4 to 5 days, and this depends on the existing skills of the trainees. The content of that training will be the basics of climate change science, climate policy, ecosystem services, climate change adaptation planning, and implementation. There are some training guidelines in the toolkit, and the training design facilitation skill is also a separate toolkit, and of course the training practice. And this is basically the training course, the agenda. It has also a guide to instruction and some technical course presentation. And the technical course presentation can be provided by the facilitator and even from the participants themselves. Training skills and practice sessions is also included. So from session 1, you have the understanding the basics of ecosystem services, causes and the basics and causes of climate change. And I think we had a lot of that discussion this morning. Climate change policies and action. What are the different climate policies that the government has or is still planning to set up? Part of the session will be climate change adaptation. What does it mean to adapt to a changing climate? And understanding how ecosystems and their services help people adapt to climate change. So what are the different ecosystem services, and how do these ecosystem services help people adapt to climate change? And the last session would be how can communities prepare for the risks and impacts of climate change. So this is the sample of the training toolkit. We're developing one adapting to changing climate, a community manual. The community manual consists of a trainer's guide, if you could see there, and another trainer's guide for the facilitators. In fact, these are old pictures, old toolkits that we did for the RED project, for the mitigation project. So this is still ongoing. The development is still ongoing, and hopefully within the end of this year we will be able to come up with the toolkit. This is how the toolkit looks. It has some glossary cards and explanation of what carbon is. There are some activities that can be used by the facilitator in explaining some simple concepts, basic concepts about environment and the impacts. And if you look at the slide, it's very, very visual and very, very colorful. Okay. When we developed the concept that, of the toolkit, this came out of the different stakeholder engagements we had in different countries. And part of that stakeholder engagement, we realized that there's need for more information on climate change adaptation and the services ecosystems provide. And particularly in headquarters, there's greater need to understand that from field offices and government and community partners. So one of the first documents that was prepared was the RED training experience, and we learned a lot from that RED training experience because there were a lot of regional trainings for indigenous organizations and government from the different countries listed here and regions like in Africa, Central America. There were stakeholder dialogues and training that were done in Suriname, Guatemala, and we did a training of trainers approach to develop the content pilot workshop with feedback and revision. So we're applying that same experience in preparing an adaptation toolkit And we intend to pilot that adaptation training and planning in Fiji. So, the product development, again, as I mentioned earlier, it's developed by a team of people from CI, those who are involved in policy, research, capacity building, people coming from, CI staff coming from the Asia Pacific. We had a workshop in June of this year. The workshop was held with participants from all over 20 field offices, representing research, marine, and some of the capacity building staff to review and revise the manual. So we were able to take a look at the draft and see whether this draft can be applicable in our own very context. Like say for the Philippines, we have a very different context when it comes to the Africa or the South American experience. So the revision is currently being made based on the feedback that we gave last June, and hopefully by the end of the year we will be able to field test the toolkit in Fiji. So basically what based from the experience we read, when we looked at the role of the forest and we prepared a manual, there was this stakeholder dialogue. We started with a lot of stakeholder dialogues. There were a lot of shared learning, and a lot of this dialogue and shared learning came into the product that we developed for training, which eventually can be used for planning and decision making. And then the circle goes back, presenting them to the different stakeholders, and if they have additional inputs, we could strengthen the document further. Okay. So the next steps will be, we will be reviewing the toolkit that will be prepared from our team, from the different field staff team. We will pilot and review from local stakeholders, and the pilot will be in Fiji. Definitely there will be some revisions and additional inputs from some members of the team, and possible translations as needed once the document has already been finalized. And also we're looking forward to a trainers network platform, especially among those field officers who will be making use of this document. And eventually there will be some outreach stage where learning grants can be provided. So basically this is the training of trainers that we did for CI, and it can be used by the communities that we work with in the different field offices. The next part of my discussion would be because the document hasn't been released yet. So the way we do our work is that we come up with our own capacity building activities, presenting climate change. We have an ongoing project on climate change adaptation, and I will explain to you this project. But just to give you a context and background, we're working the Verde Island Passage, and it's a priority marine biodiversity conservation corridor of the Sulu-Sulawesi Seascape. The Sulu-Sulawesi Seascape is this area where Conservation International Philippines has current initiatives on working in different corridors, and we have one climate adaptation project here. The Sulu-Sulawesi Seascape is part of a larger area, which is a coral triangle, which is composed of Malaysia, Indonesia, Timor-Leste, Papua New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands, and the Philippines is at the top of that triangle. And the triangle is considered as the richest marine fishing ground anywhere in the planet. It's just like the Amazon of the seas. And again, we're here in the Philippines. We work in 3 corridors: the Verde Island Passage corridor. We work here in the Cagayan Ridge corridor. El Nido is over here. We have a representative from El Nido. It's in northern Palawan. Also in northern Palawan, we have some areas that are considered as ancestral waters, and there's another group working on that one. We have the Balabac Ridge corridor, and of course this is what we call the Tri-National Sea Turtle Corridor, because this is a corridor where 3 countries, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, work together to protect sea turtles in this area. And we are working on a sea turtle network of marine protected areas, which we will soon implement. Okay, so that's the context. And again, I mentioned we work here in the Verde Island Passage. This is the Verde Island Passage. This passage was created under an executive order by the previous president, designating this as an important biodiversity area. And in this area, we have this is about 1.4 million hectares, comprised of 5 provinces, 33 coastal municipalities, about 1.7 million people. This has the richest fishing ground and a top tourist destination. We have dive sites in many of this area. This island, which we call the Lubang and Look Island, this is one of the last Japanese straggler surrendered in the 1970s. And this is considered as a climate smart or climate resilient marine protected area, which we established in 2011. So that area in itself is considered the center of marine diversity in the world, and this has been analyzed by Carpenter and Springer when they come up with the term center of marine diversity, because if the Coral Triangle is a diverse area for coastal and marine resources, they found out that part of the within the Coral Triangle, the center is in the Verde Island Passage. Of course, the other countries are contesting that label. Nevertheless, recently when the California Academy of Sciences came to the Philippines in June of 2011, they discovered additional species that were not discovered earlier, and these are new discoveries. Something about 200 new species were added into the list, and they're still trying to determine the others, which they are still trying to name. So the way we do our work in the Philippines, we use science to define the issues and problems getting to matter to policymakers. We did a vulnerability assessment. We did a fish and egg larval dispersal studies. This fish and larval dispersal studies, very, very relevant, and we presented this not only to policymakers but also to the communities to determine the habitat extent of the fishery in the Verde Island Passage. We tried to find out the status of the marine protected areas in this area, in this region, because there are some marine protected areas that were established prior to sea ice intervention. We had a lot of perception surveys, community dialogues with the different fishing communities, trying to understand the different levels of threats. We tried to understand the replenishment potential of the fishery in this area, and we did another round of threat assessment, and eventually we came up with priority marine protected areas, those that are marked in red. So these priority marine protected areas. We had some discussions internally and with the community in terms of why these areas are considered priority areas, and we also considered some climate change indicators in identifying the priority marine protected areas. And of course, we did the vulnerability assessment. And as a result, we were able to come up with a list of 70 marine protected sites all over the 3 provinces. We're working currently in 3 provinces, in this province, and the Batangas province. We still haven't started our work in the eastern part of the Verde Island Passage. And currently, there are about 12 member municipalities, and in this province and in this province, there are about 8 member municipalities, and the list is growing primarily because a lot of other municipalities are putting up their own marine protected areas. And aside from that, they are also a member of the MPA network. So you have a lot of marine protected area managers working together, meeting regularly to discuss management effectiveness of their marine protected areas. They're also discussing enforcement concerns, and also they're sharing lessons across the channel between this province and that province. So there's a lot of exchange of information going on, and over the last 2 days, there was an MPA, a Marine Protected Area Forum that was conducted, and they also discussed issues about climate change. So since we have that already, we are working in the Verde Island Passage. We're trying to do a systematic vulnerability analysis of people and ecosystems. We're developing the theories of change once we're implementing the climate adaptation project. We have started to gather a lot of socioeconomic baselines in target communities. We're also developing the vulnerability index. We're evaluating the cost effectiveness of our adaptation intervention, and we're engaging local, national, and international policymakers. And lastly, we have a lot of IEC and capacity building on ecosystem-based adaptation. So again, this is the vulnerability assessment that we conducted for the Verde Island Passage. It's a very, very macro level vulnerability assessment that we did for the Verde Island Passage. And as a result, we were able to determine which of the areas are highly vulnerable and which are moderately vulnerable. If you look at the pattern of storms in the Philippines, storm is a very, very major climate issue in the Philippines, and based on the tracking that was done by the weather forecasters, most of the extreme storms do pass in this area. And this will definitely affect not only biodiversity but also livelihoods of people dependent on coastal and marine resources in the area. So again, as I mentioned earlier, we did this very macro level vulnerability assessment, trying to determine the ecological vulnerability of fish, coral, mangrove, and seagrasses. We also tried to determine the vulnerability of humans, particularly fisheries. We're talking about earlier the different types of livelihood. Fisheries is a major important livelihood in the area. Tourism, foreshore development. There's a lot of foreshore development, conversion of lands from mangroves into fish ponds. We also look at human health and food security issues. So this was the result of that earlier intervention. And as a result of that intervention, when we did the vulnerability assessment, now we are implementing the ecosystem-based adaptation as a means of improving livelihoods and conserving biodiversity in the face of climate change. This is a new project which started last year, and this project is part of an international project where South Africa, Brazil, and the Philippines are implementing ecosystem-based adaptation in our respective ecosystems. So Brazil has the reach to reef, South Africa has the terrestrial component of the ecosystem-based adaptation, and in the Philippines it's coastal and marine. And we're implementing that in the Verde Island Passage. And basically that project will secure the coastline, increase coastal resilience to storm surges, flooding, and erosion through mangrove restoration and protection. And secondly, the objective is to build the resilience and adaptive capacity of fisheries and related livelihoods in the region. And as I mentioned earlier, fisheries is a major livelihood in the Verde Island Passage. Again, we did a lot of work. We did a participatory mangrove assessment in this island. This island is considered a climate resilient MPA, and the participatory mangrove assessment involved the participation of communities in identifying the status of the mangroves and determining what type of intervention is needed to protect current mangroves and even to protect communities from the potential impact of climate change, particularly storm surges and sea level rise. So this is just some of the photos of our mangrove rehabilitation work. We're going to do mangrove and beach forest nursery. We're going to establish this for the beach forest. And in fact, our colleague came up with a beach forest species and mangrove associates in the Philippines. There's a listing of different types of beach forests that disappeared, and some of them are out there, and we are propagating some of the beach forests that can be planted to stabilize some of the areas, to protect areas from storm surges. We have mangrove rehabilitation initiative in the coastal villages. So these are the things that we're doing to achieve the objective of securing coastlines. So the way we do our work is that we build on our initial marine protected and MPA networks in the area. That's why many of our partners are also marine protected area managers and local stakeholders. We're doing mangrove and beach forest species reforestation. We're looking into the fisheries adaptation. There's an ongoing research to determine the extent of the vulnerabilities of the fisheries in the Verde Island Passage and determine what type of adaptation strategies that can be applied. We're already moving towards income diversification and livelihood. We're talking with the communities who are impacted by climate change and trying to come up with livelihood strategies that will protect communities. And of course, we're working at the local planning and policy, wherein we want the adaptation responses and the suggestions coming from the community be integrated in the local development and local policy, and even at the national level. That's why we are building partnerships and to support the EBA concept. We work with the national agencies. These agencies, and of course we work with the local governments and community groups. We have the mayor who is very, very supportive of our initiative. We work with local communities, local NGOs, academia, and partners, and of course village leaders and community members. Okay, so some pictures of stakeholder engagement and health.